Welcome to Master Your Merger, the podcast for leaders navigating the people side of mergers and acquisitions. Each week, your host Klint Kendrick talks with deal makers, HR leaders, and integration experts to uncover what really works when it comes to people, culture, and performance during a deal. From retaining top talent to aligning leadership, you'll hear real stories and actionable insights from the people doing the work, all designed to help you make your merger work. If you're leading through M&A, this is your weekly playbook.
Welcome to the Master Your Merger podcast. Today's guest is someone who brings a rare and powerful combination of experience to the M&A table. Evelyn De La Cruz has spent years navigating the high-stakes world of mergers and acquisitions, and more recently, she's been on the front lines helping companies select the right executive search partners. Her dual perspective, both as a strategic dealmaker and as someone who understands how leadership impacts integration, give her unique insight into what it really takes to set up a deal for success, especially on announcement day. Evelyn, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Clint. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to see you again. Evelyn, let's jump right in. You've been through a number of M&A deals, and you have one of the most amazing histories in this space that I've ever heard. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and what got you into M&A?
Sure. So my background was a blend of HR systems consulting and HR generalist work until the magical moment when I happened to be on the team at IBM that was responsible for integrating PricewaterhouseCoopers consulting. And that was my start. So in that particular one, I was not on the deal team, but I was on the integration team. My job during the deal was to keep the home fires burning while my boss was out doing the deal. And then when the merger finally happened, I, with a counterpart from PricewaterhouseCoopers, were charged with both integrating the HR team, but also making sure that we were watching and doing the right things to integrate the talent in. And as you can imagine in a deal like that, when you're buying a consulting house, when you're buying people, so if you mess that up and everybody's leaving, there goes your money walking right out the door. So that's how I got started in M&A. And then eventually found my way to Amazon, where I did all of their deals for the 3 years that I was there. And on from there into some additional consulting work and doing a lot of transformation work for future teams.
Fantastic. So you've done a lot of announcement days, and that's a topic that's near and dear to both of our hearts. What's one thing most companies underestimate about the announcement day itself?
I think it's a combination of things, two things that join together. And ultimately, it's, I think, the fear that exists in the acquired team. And it's at the day of announcement, right? Oh my God, this news. But there's also usually, whether we like it or not, whether we try hard or not, a group of people who've been hearing about this outside of the deal team. So they've been hearing bits and pieces and don't really know, and maybe they've been sharing. So the corollary part to, that's why I say a couple of things. The corollary part to day one is what noise has been going on in the system before you get to day one, because when you get to day one, people are afraid, and they're either afraid because they've been hearing things or they're afraid because it's very sudden, and you've got to be prepared for both, right? So how are you talking about this to manage that fear and to calm that fear? That's the first thing. The first thing of acceptance of it is how do you get them to start being comfortable with this conversation? And that, like I said, so that corollary of lead in of the noise in the system ahead of time and complicate it.
Yeah, I definitely know a few times I've done an announcement day and had an employee come up to me afterwards saying, yeah, we knew something was going on. Our leadership has been gone. There have been meetings at weird hours. There have been cancellations. We just weren't sure what it was. And in some ways, it almost feels like the announcement calms the fear, but it almost maybe replaces it, right? So it's one kind of fear of what's going on with a new fear of, okay, we now know it's an acquisition. What does that mean now?
Exactly. And yes, exactly. What clarity can you bring on day one to what that looks like? It becomes really huge to either quieting those fears and allowing the team to then absorb and move forward together, or in some cases, answering those fears rather directly. Kind of depends on what's going on in the strategy, right? So as you and I both know, so much of what we do comes back to the strategy. Why are we doing this?
Speaking of the strategy, meeting the tactics in that moment where the employees find out that their lives are upended or not, right? Depending on the integration model, they're going to have jobs or not, depending on the talent model. Who needs to be aligned before that announcement goes live?
I think fundamentally, the deal team obviously needs to be fully aligned. The deal team is not just the acquiring team, it's the whole team, right? So it's the team on the target side that's a part of all of these decisions. It's the team on the acquiring. That really does come down to what's the business strategy? Why are we doing this? Why does this make sense? And what are the goals that we're trying to achieve? And how are we going to achieve them? And then that has to flow all the way through into the management team and into HR to make sure that those key players are aligned as you then start to talk to their employees, right? Direct report to the managers or the extended teams of the managers and the HR people who are responsible for really being the front line of answering a lot of those fears and those questions. And it's interesting because I've been on both sides of those strategic conversations from the human resources perspective. So when, particularly at Amazon, when I was there, and I cannot speak to the current status of how they do this with the different deals, but when I was there, our directive was make everybody feel like this is the best thing to happen to them since sliced bread.
Okay.
And so what did we need to do for day one? What did we need to do in compensation? What did we need to do in how we were adapting? What messaging was going to be important to that group about how they were going to be managed going forward? And in some cases, these were teams of 3 or 4 people. And in other cases, it was $1 billion company. So very different aspects, but being really clear before we got to day one about what that messaging was really going to be and making sure that all the players that needed to be aligned to that messaging were aligned to it. Contrast that with a deal that shall remain nameless in terms of the acquirer and the target when I was often consulting much later, where the acquiring firm basically said, we don't care if they all quit. We don't need them. We want their contracts. We're not even sure we need their buildings. And we don't think we need any of those people. We just want their contracts. And so trying to put that together, and by the way, it sent the consultants we were in our own private room just spinning because that was counter to everything all of us had ever been taught.
Right.
How to do a deal, right? But that was the strategy of the acquiring company. And so therefore, everything that was being built was tuned to that strategy, whether that was the right way to treat the target employees or not. That was the strategy. So that was the package that was being built. And I think that like I said, it really all goes back to that strategy. What are you trying to achieve? And then how do you create the messages? I think there are humane ways to craft very difficult messages.
Yes.
I'm not sure that particular client was great about that work. Sometimes you do have to do layoffs. Sometimes those layoffs are announced right away. Sometimes it's later, but there are humane ways to have those conversations, even when they're difficult, but it all goes back to the strategy. I think for me, fundamentally, whether it's a deal or anything else that I'm personally involved in, if I understand the strategy, if I understand the vision, if I understand the direction, then I understand the steps that need to happen to get there. Whether I like what those steps mean to me or to my team or not, I don't have to like them. But if I can understand this is where we're going, this is therefore why we need to do this, right? So again, for me, that becomes part of how much of that can I communicate on day one? How much of that can I be really clear with these individuals on? Definitely, at least with the management team and with HR, but hopefully with everybody who's hearing that announcement, how transparent can you be? How direct can you be? And that's, to me, is the fastest, easiest way to soothe it all, get the conversations going, and let the organization move forward in whatever form or fashion the strategy is calling for.
That makes complete sense. One of the things that I've seen over the years, Evelyn, and I'm sure you've seen it too, is different companies and even different deals within the same company may or may not know their integration strategy at the time of announcement. So how do you recommend firms deal with it if they don't know, right? It's one thing if they know exactly what's happening with the org structure and the job alignment and other pieces of the integration model. But it feels like a lot of times leaders are like, hey, this is a target company we want. We think that they add value for name your strategic reason, but we're still not quite sure what we're going to do with them. So how do you deal with employee communications in that world of uncertainty?
Yeah, you're right. That's the hardest place. What are you saying? Because you don't know what to say, essentially. Honestly, the first thing I would do back in the deal room
Yeah.
is to really try to get the deal team to nail down, why are we doing this, right? So maybe we don't know how we're going to integrate it yet, but what's the business reason that we feel that acquiring this company is the right thing to do? Now, keep in mind, sometimes you don't want to be transparent with that, right? I'm a big transparency person. You can't always do everything. There's confidentiality issues that you need to respect, but I'm a big transparency person. It's how I lead as well for the team I manage. I feel the more I can share, the more we can work on it together, the better solutions we're going to end up with. I believe that coming through M&A as well. But to me, it goes back to the deal team. Why are we buying this? And I've literally been involved in deals where we're going to buy that and shut it down, like on purpose. We know going in, we're going to buy it, shut it down. We're going to offer those people jobs, but we're shutting down what they're doing. And that's the reason we're buying it, right? Is to shut it down. All the way through to oily up some combinations of how do we do this better, and it's going to expand our business. And like I said, it comes back to what was the strategy? So even if you're not going to do the integration right away, what then, from a strategy perspective, what messages can you share in a transparent way? Guys, we don't have the answers. We don't know exactly what this is going to look like. It's going to take us some more time to figure out, but where we think the synergies are and why we did this is whatever that description might be for that deal. And it's going to take us some time to work our way through that. A place where I did see some of that sort of it takes time to figure out the leadership team was that IBM PricewaterhouseCoopers merger. There were definitely ideas about who should be where and from a leadership team perspective. And there was definitely clarity that said there needed to be a certain number of PricewaterhouseCoopers people in those leadership roles. It needed to be seen as, while definitely it was an acquisition, not a merger, right? So it was a big company swallowing a smaller company, but that the two teams that were actually integrating were considered by the leadership to be relatively equal. And so therefore the leadership team, the ultimate leadership team, the practice leaders, right, so to speak, should be an even mix of IBM and PricewaterhouseCoopers. But not all of those decisions were necessarily made or ready to be announced at the time we had to announce the deal. So part of the communication strategy was, you will see a blend. We are committed to a blend, right? We have not finalized all of those decisions. We've not had all of those conversations about exactly who and where, but we will share them as soon as we can, but know that we are committed to that. And at least enough of the framework showing it, demonstrating it, to make people actually believe that we meant it when we said it. But again, I think it goes back to strategy and transparency, even when you don't know. And I've actually been involved on post integrations. So integrations way after the deal. And that's actually an interesting twist as well.
Yeah.
We had a plan, we had a strategy. We decided, 10 years later, that didn't work because here's the mess we're in. And now what are we going to do with it? But like I said, if you go back to the strategy, why did we do this? What is the point and how much can we share?
Yeah. Somewhere in there, there's a balance between sort of legal accuracy, financial accuracy, and the human-centered part of the message. How do you work to strike that balance when you're preparing communications for announcement day?
Absolutely. It is tough. It is absolutely tough. One of the things that I strongly recommend is having a great communications person that you can work with who is astute, whether you develop that skill over time. So, speaking to our audience, whether an individual develops that skill over time themselves, or whether they have somebody in-house that they can go to, or there are actually some people who specialize in that kind of work as well, that essentially you'd be hiring them to help you craft your communications messages. It's a small consulting gig kind of a thing. Being really careful about how you word things is really important. And sometimes it really does come down to the nuances of which words are you choosing and what messages are you therefore telegraphing. So once you craft that message very carefully about what you can say and what you can't say, the lawyers are involved, right? We're not going to disclose this. You can't disclose that. Then the next piece of it honestly, is training the people who are going to talk about it.
Mm.
Because you can have the best crafted press release, right? Or statement. And you can have a wizard create that statement for you. And no, I'm not talking about a computer wizard, although plenty of AIs will help you do this. But you can have the most creative human mind create you the most wonderful statement. But if your announcement leader gets out there and goes off script, right, you're in trouble there too. So it really is what messages, how are we going to talk about those messages? So to those leaders, what's my FAQs? What are the things I'm not allowed to say? And really spending the time preparing not only those statements, but also those leaders to go have those conversations to talk about, because it's going to get at some point, those conversations will become extemporaneous. You're going to open for Q&A. You're going to be in a small group meeting 3 weeks later, and people are going to ask you other questions. You got to be ready. And if those leaders are not prepared to handle those tough questions with the answers you want them to give, and then they have to know it, own it, believe it, so that it is perceived as sharing and transparent to the extent that they can be. A little media training wouldn't go amiss for some of those leaders. And depends on who we're working with and how good they are at it. Some of our corporate leaders who do town halls all the time have already been through that kind of training. They're very good at it. Someone who's a corporate leader of a smaller company and is not used to having to handle those kinds of tricky messages may need to rehearse. But it really does come down to what's that wording? What are we allowed to say? What are we not saying? And then how are we going to handle those tough questions? Because I guarantee you there's going to be somebody in an audience somewhere, whether it's an email or it's a live event, who's going to ask you that tough question. And not only did you have to have what you were saying in your package statement, but you have to have how you're going to answer it, because you can't just not answer the question.
Right.
You can always fall back on we'll gather all the questions and get answers out later. Yes, you can do that. But at some point, you got to answer the questions, because if you don't, you're just stoking that fear again.
And I don't know what you've seen, but I think human nature would have us then make up the worst case scenario in our heads.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The office grapevine is a fantastic storytelling zone, to your point. And all kinds of stories, creative writing will come out of your office grapevine. And sometimes that's very valuable, and sometimes that's very dangerous. And so, yes, you're right. Making sure that we've injected the right information into the system to shut that down and have people functioning on the real aspects versus what somebody's inserted that they may not have knowledge to insert, but they're going to insert. So how do you counter that back?
So we talked a little bit about leadership, and given that you've spent the last several years in the space of leadership, I would love to break this down and talk through maybe a couple of different levels of leadership on announcement day or the day after. How do you think about top leadership? What is the role of top leadership presence in shaping how employees receive news of a deal?
I think their visibility and their accessibility is really important. I go back to my days at Amazon, where we were buying companies that were 40, 50, 100 people. And one of the things that we made certain of is when we were touring, going to do our diligence meetings and then having day one, creating that public scenario, that the unit leader from Amazon, who was going to be the boss of, this. So think of an umbrella, and this new thing is going to come in and hang under the umbrella. That boss needed to come and be present. They needed to be a part of the deal. They needed to be talking with the leaders of the target along the way to be building those relationships way before you got to day one. But then they needed to be, in my opinion, physically present on day one. Granted, if you've got a multi-location, they can only be in one place. So you got to carefully pick which one that is, and then have satellite leaders but being present and being available and being perceived as they showed up, not just to stand in the back of the room, but they showed up. They take the stage, they speak, they are available to have meetings and have conversations. Maybe they pop into some kind of a staff meeting, pick a level, depends on the type of organization. that you're going into. So is it a meeting of managers who are gathering? So here comes the leader to talk to them. Or is it a small enough organization that leader can actually go into a first level staff meeting? But that being present, being seen as accessible and reachable and honest, that honesty of presence, I think is hugely important. And bluntly, to a large degree, there is no substitute.
Yeah.
Who is my new North Star? Who am I counting on? Do I believe them? Do I feel like I can potentially put my trust in them? Do they come across to me like a person who's interested in this business that they're acquiring and therefore interested in the work that the people around me, that I and the people around me are doing? Yeah, if you're acquiring 1,000-person company, is that person going to know every first level person? No, but you want to say, look, our manufacturing teams are critical and we expect those to keep functioning exactly as they have been. We may continue to work on best practices and improvements, but the team is critical to what we deliver. That's not changing, right? But having that be a very credible message from a present leader makes all the difference in the world, in my opinion. And then it rolls down from there, right? So ultimately, in communicating a deal, I think everybody deserves the chance to ask questions in a small group, whether that's with their own manager or maybe with an HR person, depends on how HR is viewed within that organization. I'm an HR person. Y'all know I'm a generalist. I'm a business partner. But I also know that there's a lot of people. One of my favorite jokes jokingly said, I always had a bowl of candy on my desk, right? To get people to come by and grab a piece of candy. Why? Because I don't want you to be afraid of me. And so that's why I say sometimes having HR have those conversations is a scary thing.
Right.
So you got to know the relationships in there. And then a family-owned company where HR is deeply embedded, you might be able to do that, right? But disseminating the information, giving each person that opportunity to have a small group conversation and ask those questions to the greatest extent possible. Again, when you're dealing with these mega mergers, that can get tricky to disseminate that all the way down. So maybe it's a town hall for a group or something like that. But just allowing people that chance to absorb and ask questions and feel like they're going to get an answer to those questions, I feel is really important. It's that transparency issue.
Yeah. So we've talked a bit about the catching company here, right? So we've talked about the catching leader needs to be present, to have a crisp, credible message. The support team, whether that's HR or other people from the business that work with that catching manager, need to be available for these small group conversations. Let's talk for a moment about the selling leader. What's the role of the selling leader on announcement day?
Incredibly similar. Being present, being available. They will be met in a small company, particularly. They will be met with a lot of disbelief. Mm-hmm. Why did we have to do this? Everything was fine, right? So being able to be transparent about why did we do this from their perspective. So their own speaking about why this deal is happening and what they are expecting to see happen in a larger deal, in like a mega merger. I do think still that acquired target being present, being a part of that announcement. In fact, leading that announcement, actually,
Right.
They're the first ones up to say, hi team, something to talk about. Here it is. They're going to frame that up, and their demeanor and their body language, right? So this is that sort of media training, how they deliver that. We can give them a great script and they can memorize that script. But if they deliver that script in a way that communicates uncertainty or communicates fear, that will telegraph. So they're the lead off. They're the ones sharing, hi, everybody. We've got great news to announce, or maybe you don't use those words depending on what the ultimate goal is, but we've got this news and we think that this is the right course. And here's why we think it's the right course. And I'd like to introduce you to our new leader or my new boss, and let them share directly with you what their thoughts are, right? But it's a whole team effort.
Yeah.
And it's very much the target company communicating in that way, almost much more so than the acquiring company.
Well, especially at first, because that's who they trust, right? They know this leader. I remember, Evelyn, I think the best example of this I ever saw, I was working for a company that had bought a tech firm, which is basically everything that I've done for most of my career, it feels. But the selling leader was really good with his team. He had read the room and realized that his message was not landing the way that he had hoped, right? Now, he had months to process this. He had put the company up for sale, and I don't think he quite realized that his team was not emotionally right there with him, right? They'd known for 5 minutes and weren't on board, and I think he was a little, let me recalibrate. And to his credit, he did that very quickly. We had brought some T-shirts to give out, and in the meeting, he actually stood up and threw the branded T-shirt over the collared shirt that he was wearing that day. And in that moment, from my perch in the back of the room, I could see the rest of the team just relax. And then the second thing he did that I didn't know about till afterwards was he knew there was going to be Q&A, and he had taken a couple of his directs and planted questions with them. Now, that was not something we had done as the buyer. We really wanted to let them organically run with their culture, but by having his leadership team ask what he knew were going to be frequently asked questions types of things, really was one of the best announcement meetings I'd been to. People went from, people almost felt betrayed by the news, and they went very quickly on this emotional journey from betrayed to at least curious. Maybe not excited, but at least curious.
Yeah. I think that is huge. Again, that leader knowing his population, knowing his leadership team. There was a deal we did at Amazon where the reasons we were doing the deal were not the front end. Okay. I'll name it. It's Zappos. Amazon did not buy Zappos to change Zappos, to take over that website and change the way they operated. And for those who paid attention or have been customers of Zappos all of these years, because it's been a long time since that purchase happened.
Yeah.
Zappos really hasn't changed. The interface that the customer has with Zappos and the service levels that Zappos provides really haven't changed. That was by design. This goes back to the strategy, right? What are we doing? The purpose of Amazon buying Zappos was completely different. It wasn't to buy Zappos and absorb it and change it. It was very much behind the scenes for technology and warehousing reasons that were valid then. Everything's changed since then.
Sure.
Technologies they use, the system, they keep improving and keep improving and keep improving. But my point in bringing this up is, to your point, there was a very powerful leader at Zappos at that time who led culturally, very clearly led culturally. And he's a legend, unfortunately, is no longer with us, but Tony Hsieh was a legend in how he created that culture. There's not only his own books about it, but textbooks about stories about what that looked like. So to your point about leveraging the leader, if we had not leveraged him and his leadership team and how he communicated with his team and the messaging that he shared with them, we would have been dead before he started.
Yeah.
And not every leader is that kind of charismatic and clearly driving specific culture. Not every leader is has that type of strength, right, of leadership. But that doesn't mean you can't leverage their knowledge of their teams, their knowledge of what questions are going to come up, and their knowledge of how to reach their people. So as you're pointing out in the example that you said, this leader clearly knew how to get his people back, right? How to keep them in the story with them.
So let's click down to the front line. We've talked about the top leaders. Let's click down to that frontline manager. How should companies prepare those frontline managers to support their teams through the initial shock or uncertainty of that announcement? We know from years and years of research that a person's immediate manager tends to be their most trusted source of information at work. So how do we get them ready?
Yeah, I think that's, to me, the first thing is that's a scale issue, right? So if you are in the middle of a mega acquisition, right? So one I did along the way was in like 56 countries.
Wow.
And not every country was necessarily a huge team, but it was in like 56 countries, or a 30,000 person company. You're going to have a really hard time getting to all of those managers pre-deal. In fact, from a confidentiality perspective, you're not going to get to them. And that then becomes, okay, so what's the cascade? We're going to announce, we're going to do the big bang up announcement. And then how are we going to get to those first line managers, that huge group potentially of first line managers, so that they're prepared? And you literally have to go from that big announce into that meeting and then out. And in some ways, it sounds horrible, but like I said, my background as a generalist, it's no different than handling a major layoff.
Sure.
Right? You make the announcement, that's probably an email. You get the managers together so they're all prepared. Usually they're prepared ahead of time, and then boom, out you go to the people. But it's got to be quick, right? You've got to do it fast. You've got to get to them right away so that you are equipping them with the information that they need to be able to answer the questions. And maybe it's gathering the questions, right? To bring it back to a PMO location, virtual location, equipping those leaders, those managers with as much information as possible, with that next click of information, and sending them out with the very clear messaging, a very clear work plan that says, okay, your next step is to go have a team meeting. And you know what? You're probably having another one in 3 days, right? To give them a chance to ask more questions that they've thought of. And here's your feedback loop to send the questions in. And here's how we're going to send the answers back out, right? Here, manager, here's your toolkit to how you're going to manage this going forward. In a smaller organization, obviously, it's much more simplistic. It's much more direct. You can do it much faster. In a bigger organization, it's going to be, what's my packet, right? My emails, my email address that they can send questions to, my script for our first meeting. I know in 3 days, you're going to send me my script for my second meeting. I'm going to put that, managers, put that second meeting on your on the calendar right away so that people know it's coming, right? Boom, boom, step by step. What do we expect those first line managers to do, second line managers to do, so that it's cascading out? And that is going to look different from different organizations. But I think if it's all targeted around the strategy and the transparency to the greatest degree, and allowing that feedback loop to come back, that then quiets the fear as it moves forward. I can ask the question and I can get an answer. I know my manager, I can trust to ask my manager a question and I'm going to get an answer. I know my manager is going to come back to me in 2 more weeks with the latest update. Or I know newsletters are going to, after these first 2 meetings, newsletters are going to start to flow with the answers to the most commonly asked questions. Or there'll be a website that we can all go to where the FAQs will just start building and we can put them in straight. Whatever it is, whatever system it is that the team feels is going to be effective with that client set, with that company. And it will look different. But again, it's all back to that quieting of the internal personal fear, and unknown is the greatest driver of that fear. So how do you help each manager to undo the unknown for their teams?
Oh my goodness. Those are such great words of wisdom, that it's all about the uncertainty and quelling that fear of the unknown. Evelyn, we're almost out of time today, but I would love to hear if you had a wish list and there were 1 or 2 things that you could get every company to do on announcement day that would make a difference. What are 1 or 2 things that would be on that wish list?
I think my first wish list, every company to be able to be very direct about their strategy with their entire company, the entire team. Why'd we do this? Okay. I'd love to end that question with, and what does that mean to you? But as we said, we don't always know that answer. So to the extent that we can, but what's that strategy? And I really think I'm going to stop there. That's my number one thing. Why? Yeah. Because I also think if I back up before day one, the certainty of that strategy, the knowledge of that strategy driving the deal, to me is so critical to a successful deal in every way, shape, or form. Forget day one for the moment. The whole way through, how do we return, whether it's shareholder value or profit or whatever the ultimate metric is going to be? That strategy is the critical piece. And if the deal team and the leadership team is not clear about what that strategy is, there is nothing that is going to go right after, including and most especially day one. Because then day one is, why are we doing this? And how transparent can I be with you about why are we doing this? And if I don't know why we're doing this, if we don't know why we're doing this, then we can't share that with the team. And then they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're working on. They don't know if they're tracking to the right goals. They don't know if their job is at risk. They don't know if their manager is going to change. It all comes back to strategy at the very beginning. And if I could wave my magic wand and have my very fondest wish, it's that every deal really knows its strategy and its why. It's raison d'etre, right? Why are we doing this? And is able to then communicate that all the way through.
Oh, fantastic. Evelyn, as we wrap up, how can people connect with you?
I'm on LinkedIn, fairly easy to find there. And my contact information is all there. I got one of those short little LinkedIn ones. So LinkedIn, Evelyn De La Cruz. And I welcome messages through LinkedIn. My email is in that contact info. And then I look forward to communicating with anyone who might have a question or want to chat through ideas together. I love doing that as well.
Fantastic. I know that you have been one of my trusted people. There have been several times where I've called and said, hey, I don't know what to do. Any recommendations based on your experience? And Evelyn, that's one of the things that I love about our community and I really appreciate about you is the willingness to reach out and to make sure that this is the most human-centered process it can be. Evelyn, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your wisdom. I think we started to just scratch the surface in a lot of ways because we could probably do more and more hours about how to rock your announcement day, but I think this is a really good starting point. So thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to Master Your Merger, hosted by Klint Kendrick. Be sure to follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you found this valuable, share it with someone leading through a deal. To explore toolkits, resources, and upcoming programs, including our free roundtables, visit masteryourmerger.com. We'll see you next time.